What is going on, everyone, and welcome to Warriors Live. Evan Giddings live at Chase Center before, honestly, a pretty big matchup tonight for the Golden State Warriors. They take on the best team in the NBA, a place that over the last decade they have become accustomed to occupying, but it is the Cleveland Cavaliers that are in town to take on the Warriors, the 27-4 Cleveland Cavaliers under the tutelage of former Warriors assistant coach for the last 3 seasons, Kenny Atkinson. He goes over to Cleveland this offseason. And, of course, the first time they met in Cleveland, which was when the Warriors are amidst some of their best basketball, the Cavs absolutely drubbed the Warriors. So hoping to hand them a little bit of the opposite foot, and that is after a 136-117 victory the first time they played back on November 8th. Two very different teams. Well, I should say one very different team. The Cleveland Cavaliers continue to roll. As right now, they've seemingly been on a winning streak for almost the entire year. They have won 6 in a row, dating back to about the beginning of December. And again, they roll into here fresh off a 149-135 victory against the Denver Nuggets. Quite simply, the Cleveland Cavaliers have played like the best team in the NBA. And they are certainly a test for any team, but I think an interesting test for the Warriors at about this time. Now, the Warriors are, of course, coming off a 109-105 win against Phoenix. Jonathan Kuminga has a second consecutive 34-point win in the victory. But the Warriors are still kind of, again, trying to figure out what team they're going to be. We've talked about this ad nauseum all day, fresh off a weekend that saw Kuminga look like a de facto and number one player in a game that featured Steph Curry, that featured Kevin Durant. Jonathan Kuminga was the best player on the floor. And so I think a lot of people have their eyes on tonight's game. And yes, the San Francisco 49ers are playing on Monday Night Football, but to me, this is a far more interesting matchup with a lot more to learn. The Niners season's effectively over, and it'd be nice to beat the Lions, but the Lions don't need that game. The Warriors, I'm not sure necessarily are expected to win tonight, as, again, Cleveland's only lost 4 times this year, and half of their losses have come to the Atlanta Hawks. They've lost to the Celtics, they've lost to the Hawks twice, and they have lost to the Miami Heat. But this is a Cleveland team that can come at you a variety of ways. In victories this season, they've had 5 different players that have been leading scorers for them. And it all starts with Donovan Mitchell, who's been, ironically, not mentioned a lot among MVP candidates, but he certainly deserves to be up there, in my estimation, as the best player on the best team. And they kind of are a team that definitely takes turns in regards to whose night it's going to be and who's got to be the best player. But Donovan Mitchell is the straw that stirs the drink, averaging close to 24 points per game. He is manning an offense that has been sensational this season. And again, Kenny Atkinson has basically leveled them up offensively. Defensively, they're still a very good basketball team, and their numbers in terms of the defensive rating have not been that much different, but offense is where they have taken leaps and strides. They are the number one offense in basketball at over 120 points per 100 possessions per game, 8th in defense, and overall, this is a team that does not do much in the negative fashion, right? Donovan Mitchell is their leading scorer. Evan Mobley is a fantastic offensive option and defensive player on the opposite end. And then Darius Garland, their 25-year-old point guard, who a lot of people were sort of out on last year due to somewhat of a down season, has bounced back in fantastic fashion, shooting nearly 50% from the field, averaging over 20 points per game. He is someone that can light it up from distance. Jared Allen has been a double-double player and an interior defender, certainly to reckon with. But then even their bench, I mean, this is probably what distinguishes Cleveland from the majority of teams around the NBA, a lot of the elite teams, is just how deep they are. And I mentioned the 5 players that have scored and that have been leading scorers in wins for the Cleveland Cavaliers this season. And that is, of course, Mitchell, Garland, Mobley, but then 2 players off the bench, one of which you might not think about. Sam Merrill had a 20-point per game, 20-point performance earlier this season. But the other players should be very familiar to Golden State Warriors fans, and that's Ty Jerome, who has really stepped into his own at age 27. A couple of years ago, he was not exactly a fan favorite in Golden State, but he has found a home in Cleveland, and as their 6th man, he has been awesome for a team that, kind of similar to the Warriors, they run 11 deep. And when they have their full cast of characters, which they virtually do tonight, the only player out for them is Isaac Okoro. Of course, Max Strus has missed quite a few games for them this season as a free agent acquisition last year. But outside of that, they're a team that can get you with 10 different guys off the pine. And the combinations that Kenny Atkinson has used this season has produced a team that is number one in terms of effective field goal percentage, that is in number two in terms of kind of their overall record this year. Or I should say their net rating, pardon me. And really, they don't have very many weaknesses. They're number one in 2-point percentage, number one in 3-point percentage. They've scored the second most points this year. Defensively, they're also a stout squad. The one thing, ironically, they do not do very well is defend the three-point line. They are fourth worst in the NBA in terms of three-point percentage against, and they are sixth in terms of three-pointers allowed. So that is something that the Warriors might be able to take advantage of, but the Warriors are going to have to be on their game tonight. And ironically, the line I saw before the game was only at about 4.5 in favor of the Cavaliers. So maybe something that is a little bit fishy, and odds makers feel like the Warriors might be able to catch the Cleveland Cavaliers in an interesting situation. But I think it's also because the Warriors are beginning to, I think, in somewhat of a second act to their season after they have really taken a dive as of late. They've only won 4 games since November 23rd, and it's kind of been because they've been searching for this second option. They've been searching for this player to plug and play alongside Curry, and during the stretch in which they lost 12 games in 15 opposite their 12-3 start this season, sometimes it was Kuminga, sometimes it was Wiggins. There was a night against Memphis, which they got blown up by 50, where Podziemski was their leading scorer. They have not had really much consistency so far this season, but in the last 2 games, it has been very evident who that player has been, and it's been Jonathan Kuminga. And against the Clippers, Steph Curry, Draymond Green didn't play. The Warriors lost by 10 points, so they kept it kind of close and had a stretch and a possibility to sort of maybe steal that game, but overall didn't crack 100. Kuminga scored roughly a third of their points, and that was virtually all they had. But on Saturday, I think he opened eyes across the NBA by being the best player again in a game that featured Steph Curry and Kevin Durant. And Kuminga was a big piece of that victory. He had 12 points in the first quarter. He had 13 points in the fourth quarter. Hit a couple of big free throws down the stretch to put the Warriors up, and then played, I thought, fantastic defense on one of the league's best weapons ever in Kevin Durant to help secure that 4-point win. So the question is, what does Kuminga, along with the Warriors themselves, have as an encore tonight for the Cleveland Cavaliers? Because they are the best team in the NBA and are playing like it, and they are in the middle of a winning streak. And so, they kind of offer a different challenge for both the Warriors as a whole, but for Kuminga. And for me tonight, we talked about this on Steiny Guru, and to me, the question is, can Curry and Kuminga play at the best of their individual levels? Can they play their best games at the same time? Because that's something that we haven't really seen. We've seen Kuminga play well, and I think that was unique on Saturday. Kuminga playing well, Curry, he played well overall, but as a whole down the stretch, again, 2 of 9 in the fourth quarter, needed Kuminga to really carry them home offensively. Can he and Curry get going together in a game that results in a win, and particularly a game that results in a win against a quality opponent? And I don't think there's a better team to sort of test that theory against than the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Warriors are not going to see Cleveland after this stage. They kind of get some East Coast teams, maybe a little bit softer portion of their schedule, though the Philadelphia 76ers, who roll into town on Thursday, are playing better basketball. But Cleveland is the best team that the Warriors will face. They get Memphis at home on Saturday, but this is kind of the last best team that the Warriors will play outside of Memphis for, a couple of weeks as we begin to sort of move into that trade and the evaluation of a potential trade area. I think this is a fantastic test for the Warriors, a fantastic test for Kuminga, and overall, I don't think the Warriors are expected to win this game, but with that, why not? Why not go try and steal one from the league's best? And even though it's on Monday night, even though it's not on national television, go put the league on notice. Play carefree, play through JK, play through Curry, and see where this thing can go. So I think this is an uphill battle for the Warriors, to say the least, but moving above 500, I'll also put them at 500. It's about trying to stay above water, and this game to me is certainly one that you can evaluate where the Warriors are at, and it's a litmus test game. It's a barometer game, and it's a place where you can see just how good you are against the league's best. And Cleveland is also on the front end of a back-to-back. So I'm curious to see if the Warriors might be able to catch Cleveland at a good portion in their season. But look, it doesn't matter whether they've played back-to-backs. It doesn't matter where they played 4 in 6 nights. It doesn't matter whether they played an extended stretch of condensed basketball. Cleveland has kicked ass this entire season. And sort of a common theme pregame was the conversation that was had about Steve Kerr versus Kenny Atkinson. And not just because Kenny Atkinson has been a part of the Warriors for the past 3 seasons as an assistant coach. Obviously came on during the championship season, helped the Warriors win a title, was one of Steve Kerr's most trusted pupils and assistant coaches. And Atkinson was glowing about Kerr pregame, said that he learned from the best. And there's a lot of kind of similar storylines between the two head coaches, where Kenny Atkinson obviously moves from Golden State to Cleveland this summer and inherits, not a great Cavaliers team, a team that made it to the second round, but a team that feels like it's kind of on the break, right on the precipice of potentially making noise and being considered a legitimate threat to win an NBA championship. Kerr was in a similar place, didn't have the kind of previous coaching experience that Kenny Atkinson did. Kenny Atkinson was, of course, the head coach in Brooklyn beforehand. His first stint, did a nice job with the Nets and a very young team before stepping into the assistant ranks. Chose not, and Kerr mentioned this specifically, chose not to take the Charlotte Hornets job. I think it was a couple of years ago. Ended up being a very wise choice, as now he has a really good team, and he's helped them to a 27-4 start, but also, similarly to Kerr, got off to a 15-game winning streak. They were 15-0 to begin this season. The only other team that has won more games to start a season was not the 2015 Warriors, but the 2016 Warriors that went on to win 73 games. And that, although was technically Kerr, was dealing with the back injury and all the rest, Kerr got off to a fantastic start his first season with the Warriors, and kind of in similar fashion had a long winning streak. They hit the ground running. But the only other team that has won, the last team I should say, that has won 15 or more games to begin a season was the 2015-16 Warriors. And while Kerr was technically not on the sidelines, Luke Walton was. He was obviously a big part of the brain trust of that coaching staff at the time when he was dealing with his back injury. So Kenny Atkinson said essentially he's learned from the best. Talk to Steve Kerr about kind of some of the similarities, or I should say the necessities to get off to such a hot start pregame. And one of the things he mentioned was having a foundation in place, and players and personnel is a big part of that. And I just asked him straight up, like, do you think, how important is it to have the trust of your best player, to have the trust of Steph Curry? And it feels like Atkinson has won over Donovan Mitchell. Maybe Darius Garland to some might be, obviously another younger kind of Cleveland Cavalier impactful player, but Mitchell's the number one that he had to win. And Kerr said he was lucky. Like, he was lucky that Steph was such a guy that was not only coachable but wanted to be coached. And winning obviously helps kind of glue everything together. But it was a player that he said in Steph that was open, was obviously stepping into the peak of his powers, but was also aided by a lot of other talent on that team, and not just the Clay and Draymond, but Steve Kerr actually mentioned the fact that Andre Iguodala was the one that sort of spearheaded the tone-setting culture that Kerr was able to help implement by sacrificing that first season when he stepped from a starting role the year before under Mark Jackson into the sixth-man role with Steve Kerr. And that was a way to sort of maximize all the different talent that the Warriors clearly had on their first championship team. But he said that Iguodala was someone that really set the tone for that group, and then someone that he thinks about a lot in regards to NBA culture. Now, I don't know if Kenny Atkinson has a player similar, because it's relatively the same starting five from last year, but I do think that Atkinson clearly has been able to unlock the offensive capabilities of that team while keeping them in a similar defensive spot. And I do think that that's a similarity between the two head coaches. Mark Jackson obviously built a defensive identity with Klay Thompson sort of spearheading the perimeter defense. Andre Iguodala, obviously extremely impactful with Harrison Barnes, but then Draymond Green, what he was able to do back in his heyday as a 23, 24, 25-year-old was just simply unmatched. And that's where I think there's a similarity, because Cleveland has remained a defensive minded group while also being able to score over 120 points. And that's what the Warriors are going to have to do tonight. Cleveland's got a good defense, but the Warriors are going to have to score. And scoring 120 has not been easy for the Golden State Warriors. In fact, the last time that they scored 120 points was November 25th against the Brooklyn Nets. And that was the game where, remember, Dennis Schroeder went crazy in the fourth quarter with 19 points. That was the last time the Warriors scored 120 in a basketball game. They might need to score 120 tonight to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, or their defense is going to have to be fantastic. And so I do think that having maybe a bit of a more trust of what the top 8 looks like for Kerr and for the Warriors is certainly necessary and is important in this game. But I think also sort of trusting what got them to the finish line against Phoenix, and even what had them at the finish line, I would say, against Indiana, Los Angeles, and going back to last week in Minnesota. The front court of Curry, Schroeder, along with the front line of Wiggins, Kuminga, and maybe even Draymond at the 5. You think about getting TJD, who's going to start tonight, of course, with Kuminga coming off the bench. But if the Warriors are in a close game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, how are they going to approach that closing lineup? I think that's a massive question that they still have to answer. And I think it includes figuring out a way, if the Warriors are to be their best, whether it's in the first, second, third, or fourth quarter down the stretch, they have to figure out a way for Wiggins and Kuminga to be on the floor at the same time, because I think that they're two best perimeter defenders, and they also are flexible offensively. And Kuminga's beginning to take strides more so as a playmaker, in addition to his individual ability to get downhill and score at the rim. And I just think he opens up everything for what also Steph Curry could do, not being asked to play as the focal scorer on every single possession. To me, is a massive difference for this Golden State Warriors team. They're also going to be without a couple of guys tonight, the Warriors are, which brings us to our Boxer & Gerson injury report, brought to you by Boxer & Gerson, Northern California's premier workers' compensation law firm, helping injured workers get their lives back for over 40 years. For more information, visit boxerlaw.com. Evan Giddings with you live at Chase Center before the Warriors take on the number 1 Cleveland Cavaliers at 27-4. Warriors a game over 500 after their win over the weekend against Phoenix. So for the Warriors tonight, they will be without Brendan Podziemski, went down with an abdominal injury in Saturday's win against the Suns. Not really an update for Kerr from him about Podziemski pregame. Gary Payton II dealing with a calf contusion that he re-aggravated against the Lakers on Christmas Day. He is also out tonight, but the Warriors will get Moses Moody back. So it's kind of an addition to that depth, and we'll see how much we see of Moses Moody tonight against a long, athletic Cleveland Cavaliers team that is only missing Isaac Okoro. And he's a player that is definitely integral to what they do defensively, but so far this season hasn't been a player that has eaten up a ton of minutes for them. He is right now 8th on the team with 21 minutes per game, but that is also, again, a guy that Atkinson can't deploy, because right now he's got essentially 11 dudes that play at or around or above 20 minutes. In fact, one of the more impactful offensive players in Ty Jerome only plays 18 minutes a game. He scores 10 points, but, again, this is a Cavaliers team that's able to stay fresh. They will throw a lot of different guys at Golden State tonight, and it's going to be up to them defensively to try and adjust, or quite frankly, they might get blown out tonight. That is also another obvious result. It's a possibility, because we saw it happen before. And Cleveland has just wrecked, especially in recent games, a lot of really good teams, some of which that the Warriors have lost to. Denver, Brooklyn. I mean, they've actually beaten Denver twice. But the one team that has given Cleveland fits this season that I think is another reason why I believe that Wiggins and Kuminga have to have big nights tonight is the Atlanta Hawks are the one team that has beaten the Cleveland Cavaliers, and in fact, they're 2-0 against them this season. And if you look at those two games, now they were back-to-back, a home and home at the end of the end of November. The two players that really gave Cleveland trouble were Jalen Johnson and DeAndre Hunter. both of those players are young, athletic forwards. And Trae Young, I think, also had a 20-20 game mixed in there. But in order for the Warriors, I think, to play with Cleveland tonight, they're going to need a lot from their wings because the combination, whether it's Garland or Mitchell, along with a host of characters, they're going to throw a ton of guys at Steph. And so it's going to, and we saw that the first time they played. I know that Curry had, a good night that night, even though they lost by 20 points. We're down at 1 point by 40. Curry didn't really play a whole lot in that game, but Kuminga, probably was their most impactful scorer with 21 points back in early November. If the Warriors want to avoid a similar situation, they're going to need Wiggins along with Kuminga to play well offensively. And to me, looking at what the Hawks did to the Cavaliers, their only two losses to a same team this season, they're going to have to take a page out of the Hawks book, as crazy as that might sound. A lot of people might not think that the Hawks are the poster children for any sort of NBA success as of late, but they have had the answer to whatever the Cleveland Cavaliers have been cooking up this season. So that's certainly something to keep in mind, which brings us to our Ticket to the Bank prediction. Brought to you by Fremont Bank, full-service banking with no compromises. I think it's got to be double digits, certainly from Wiggins and Kuminga, but this is a game where both of them are going to have to be at least around, if not above, 50%. And that's also something we have not seen. Andrew Wiggins hasn't played particularly well offensively the last 6 games. I think he's done a great job defensively. We'll probably see him, on a combination of Mitchell, along with, some of those other forwards that they throw out there. And he's going to be chasing guys around all night. But he and Kuminga, to me, both have to be around 50%. And I would say 45% shooting the basketball from the floor. That is what I will take to the bank tonight. Wiggins and Kuminga will be able to have that success against Cleveland. And again, that's brought to you by Fremont Bank, full-service banking with no compromises. As for our out-of-town game of the night, this was actually one that I was kind of looking forward to between Dallas and Sacramento. The Kings have lost 6 in a row. They're a team that's reeling. Meanwhile, Dallas is without Luka Doncic, but a whole host of guys are either not playing or suspended. Najee Marshall punched, I believe it was Yusuf Nurkic. That was the reason why Nurk was out over the weekend against the Warriors. Marshall suspended for this game. Kyrie Irving is out for this game. Luka Doncic is out for this game. So it's going to be up to Klay Thompson and PJ Washington to try and beat a Sac team that is just reeling. I mean, I know that they have largely most of their players available, but they just fired their head coach, and they haven't been able to stop the sinking ship. So that's probably the most juicy game on the slate. Honestly, there's not many good games tonight in the NBA. The Warriors and Cavaliers are probably the best, though the team also people want to keep an eye on tonight is up in Portland with the 76ers, who play on New Year's Day against Sacramento before they play on Thursday here in Golden State. So Philly quietly has won 7 of 10 games. They're beginning to get healthy, and maybe more importantly, are beginning to lean into their younger superstar, budding superstar, I would say, in Tyrese Maxey, and being less Paul George dependent, being less Joel Embiid dependent, and being primarily Tyrese Maxey dependent. It's a common theme among NBA teams. If you have good young players, you ride them. And the 76ers are beginning to figure out. I think the Warriors with Jonathan Kuminga, though he certainly is not at that level of Maxey, is beginning to figure it out. And they're going to need him against a Cavaliers team that is extremely, extremely good and has been difficult to beat no matter what portion of the season it has been so far. Coming up in half an hour, and actually in just a minute, Tim Roy will take you the rest of the way on our network pregame show here on 95.7 The Game before he and Tom Tolbert have the play-by-play at the top of the hour. Warriors at 16-15 hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers at 27-24. The second and final time they will play the Cavs tonight. Of course, maybe some people remembering the rivalry that has stemmed back from the 2015 finals. Similar faces for the Warriors, very different faces for the Cavaliers, but nonetheless, a fantastic test that I'm looking forward to tonight. We will be with you after the game on Warriors Wrap-Up. Again, Evan Giddings with you live from Chase Center right now, sending things off to Tim Roy for the remainder of your network pregame show. You've been listening to Warriors Live, presented by Xfinity at Home Run The Go. You get the fastest internet to all your devices. We'll talk to you after the game on your home for Warriors basketball, 95.7 The Game.